All right. Zach, thank you so much for joining today.
Absolutely, Kyle. Thank you for having me.
So, just to get going, what is it that you do when people ask you?
Um, it really depends who I'm talking to. I think most people on the street, I will either just say like, I'm a rancher, or if there are some people who have Burning Man experience or experience in that culture, I'll explain. Yeah, I manage operations for a 4,000-acre ranch, the Burning Man organization owns. Which sometimes the follow-up question to that is like, wait a minute, people work for Burning Man? And I say, yeah, they do. But 2016, Burning Man purchased a 4,000-acre ranch that is about 12 miles from where we do the main Burning Man event, and we sort of have taken on that project as an opportunity to explore kind of the new frontiers of Burning Man culture, to really embrace the concept of land stewardship in place. One of the great things about Burning Man the event is it's the largest leave no trace event in the world, and we work really, really hard to maintain that standard, with the BLM and with our community partners, and do a lot of education. And having a place that is, at least for the time being, ours to steward and to shepherd, it brings up a reexamination of kind of the fundamental principles of Burning Man, and also an opportunity to say, what if we left a better trace? So,
Mm.
we do art builds, research projects, really now currently looking into like some long-term issues around non-native species removal, developing good indigenous relationships with the original inhabitants of that land. Um, and then,
Who
just trying to hang out and have uh, a good time in the way that we kind of do as folks that enjoy Burning Man.
who were the original peoples of Fly Ranch and the whole Playa area?
Yeah, so that area was mostly populated by the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, and the Western Shoshone tribe. The Paiutes call themselves Numu, which is just the people, because for the longest time, in their understanding, they were the people of that land. Um, on the way from Reno to Gerlach, which is the town that's about 20 miles away from Fly Ranch, it's our closest little village. Um, you pass by Nixon, and Nixon is sort of the anchor right along Pyramid Lake, on the reservation for the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. And we encourage people to stop by. They have a great visitor center and museum. We've had some great partners that we've been working with there, um, both in terms of educating people, repatriating any artifacts that are found, making sure that we have an open door policy for any members of the tribe who want to come to the property and enjoy. And then, small projects in the works, like we have a certain type of reed that grows in our water systems. We have a large abundance of water, and so one of the things that we're working with the tribe on, that actually started recently, is those are reeds that they have used historically to build sacred mats out of, and they use them for funeral ceremonies, and they don't have them on the reservation anymore. And so, we're working on collecting those, working with them to learn the ways to build these ceremonial mats, and to provide that opportunity for people to have that connection to their heritage, and so trying to support them in whatever way um, that we can. But we are highly cognizant of the fact that our organization, primarily founded by white people from the West Coast, we come with our cultural context, and we have both a lot to learn, a great debt to that community, and that, like, we are temporary stewards of this place, trying to do it in right relation, not just for the Burning Man community, but also in a very serious way for um, the historical human inhabitants of that space, the current animal inhabitants of that space, the plant inhabitants of that space, and do it the right way.
So I think that people have a good sense of what Burning Man looks like and even what that dry lake bed looks like. But as I was tootling around on the internet, Fly Ranch looks quite a bit different. Can you describe that space for people who don't have an image in their mind yet?
Yeah. So you're right. For being only 12 miles away from where the event is, it can be a dramatically different environment. So The 4,000 acres is kind of divided in a long, narrow strip that's about 4.5 miles by 1.5 miles. In totality, its size is about 80% of the size of Black Rock City, to give people some context who have sort of experienced that and maybe pedaled out to the trash vents or seen the big perimeter. Um, and there's sort of three main sections. The southernmost section is you know, mostly native sagebrushes, pretty undisturbed, with the exception of the fact that it is the place where we held Burning Man 1997. It's the only time it was held on private land. There were some issues after the 96 event, which was, sort of unpermitted in the peak of the anything goes, quasi anarchy, come as you are, and we'll just make this, this cultural sneeze happen and like see what happens. Um,
I
and
love that. The cultural sneeze. I've not
yeah,
heard that term.
yeah, and that holds true to some degree still. It builds up, it builds up, it builds up. There's this sort of cacophonous apex, and then it dissolves. Um, it's this, I call it the cultural heartbeat of the sneeze, like this kind of rhythmic build up. And then so Burning Man 1997 was held on that property, with about 10,000 people at that event. They put in roads. They held it on the crest of the Wallapai Playa. On that southern section, it opens up to a smaller lake bed called the Wallapai Flat. And because of events that transpired that year, we still have quite a few what we will call artifacts left over from Burning Man 1997. There was a request that the organizers and event participants leave the event almost immediately after the close of the event. And so there was quite a bit of stuff left over. So we have some old art, we have some old infrastructure that's sort of been there and kind of decaying in the very extreme weather. So we have an open standing invite for anyone that attended the 1997 Burning Man event, that you are more than welcome to come pick up your stuff. We would appreciate that. The middle section of the property is a former homestead. It was a part of the John Casey estate, he was one of the largest landowners in the West. It eventually then, right around 98, passed to Todd Jaksic and the Jaksic family. It had been It's got kind of a storied history, that middle section of the property, everything from having been a flight training school to an old post office, to eventually an alfalfa farm, which left in some infrastructure for like moving water and an old ranch house and doing some of that stuff. But as we have learned time and time again, if you plant a monoculture, even one that generates a lot of nitrogen, even one that is suitable to the extreme climate that we have, as soon as you stop attending to it, some other plants are going to move in. So right now, we have a giant field of cheatgrass, Russian knapweed, and some things that are not native to the area, some things that are for us going to be a decade of work of trying to mitigate, prevent further spread of, and trying to address in areas where there are activities. Right now that middle section is kind of our operations area. It's where we have our base camp, and we're instituting some of our heaviest use of infrastructure. We do volunteer days, we do small campouts, and a lot of that stuff is based there. And then the northern section of the property is probably 350 acres of wetlands. And so there are several hundred springs ranging from hot to cold. It's also, if anyone has heard of Fly Ranch just out there in the world, the thing that they've probably seen is the Fly Geyser, which is a large, multicolored, constantly spewing geyser of very mineral rich hot spring water that sort of shoots into the air. And it's been on the cover of National Geographic and Lonely Planet, and all these sort of like weird wonders of the world. And that's surrounded by about 200 springs varying from hot to cold. There's a beautiful large hot spring pool. I'm a fan of hot springs. I love traveling around seeing hot springs. It is by far the nicest hot spring that I've been. Usually sits right around 103, 104. It's about 30 feet deep, about the size of an Olympic swimming pool. So it's really nice. And then our property is adjacent to what has been the Burning Man Work Ranch, which is where a lot of the infrastructure for the teams that produce the event, the Department of Public Works, a lot of the equipment that we use is stored there. So we sort of have this, wonderful next door industrial capacity with an auto shop and a metal shop and a wood shop and an incredible staff and stuff next door, which allows us to preserve and protect a lot of the property itself. So we've been thinking a lot over the last 4 or 5 years about not only how to preserve that space for beauty and how to be delicate in our impact on that space, but also how to do that culturally. There's a long history of land-based projects, intentional communities, that kind of thing, where there's like regular issues that folks run into that like we can learn from that. We are not. This is a novel step for Burning Man in terms of saying, cool, we're gonna create a year-round base for this culture and for people to come and participate and do what burners do. But also not maybe fall into some of those traps. We're part of a long lineage of land-based projects, so
It's
we can
funny
kind of
you
learn from
mentioned
that.
the hot springs. I've also spent quite a bit of hours in hot springs, and this last year I visited Yellowstone for a while. Drove through Grand Tetons up into Montana, and I was looking at Old Faithful one day, which is the geyser,
Mm-hmm.
and I was overcome with this feeling of awe and terror. I think that hot springs are this incredible reminder that we are on this crust just below us is molten hot lava, and at
Yeah,
any
yeah,
time the whole thing could just cave in. And so there's this odd schism between relaxation, right, in these nice warm bathtubs, and uh a reminder of your mortality and the fragility of the ground with which you stand.
yeah, yeah. It is a direct confrontation with like the elemental nature of the rock that we're spinning on this sort of spaceship Earth. There's something about the fact that where we are is 24 miles from the nearest grid. It's really about 90 minutes from the nearest city, and has some really extreme weather, whether it's hailstorms and snowstorms that come out of nowhere. Or winds that are 60, 70 miles an hour regularly. Or we can have a run of 2 weeks where it's over 106, over 107 degrees, and we have to sort of contend with that. And it's both an operational and infrastructure challenge. It is a community challenge in terms of how you can mutually support each other, or design for the fact that like on any given day, like things could just go buck wild. But there's also something in the spirit of it where folks are forced to confront the reality of the elemental forces at play in our world. It's very apparent. Whereas I think in a urban landscape, between the concrete and the brick, it's easy to get a false sense of security, perhaps.
Does that road out to Fly Ranch ever get blocked with weather, so you're just stuck out there?
Not as of yet. We have the
Hmm.
benefit of some pretty great 4x4 trucks. Right now, for the last few years, our programmatic season has generally run from late March to October. During the winter, we sort of use the opportunity to do a reset, to take some time for our crew, and to give space to the property, and the folks that we share that property with. So, I have been out there, and you'll have perhaps a foot of snow. One of the things about the property is that it's in a dried up lake bed. It's in a valley. So it is sitting above one of the most active geothermal um, hotspots in the West Coast. It's right where this valley meets the granite ranges, and the subduction that happens where that valley sort of tucks underneath the mountains. There's lots of little pockets where warm water come up in the Great Basin. And so in that way, we do get snow, but on the valley floor so much and on the roads, it doesn't totally stick. I will say that there have been times where there are some pretty severe dust storms. Not quite as bad as we have in Black Rock City for anyone that's been to the event. But there are times when we're just kind of at a standstill, where it's like, cool, not driving, cool, not really going anywhere, shelter in place, hang out. But that's usually pretty temporary.
Yeah. I have a buddy who works for the Nature Conservancy, and he manages this pristine uh, preserve in Colorado. And he was telling me that he'll be out there by himself sometimes. And it's cool, it's beautiful. And sometimes these snowstorms will hit where he can't get out. And
Yep.
that moment when he realizes that he can't get out and that he's truly relying on himself now is, I think, a very helpful thought for people to have. And we all had that thought a little bit during the pandemic, right? That's we need toilet paper. That was the
Yeah.
first thought that everyone
Yeah.
had.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, to your point about vulnerability, I think that it's really good for people to take inventory of what they have and how long they could sustain. Um, and planning for the future, right? You mentioned intentional communities. Intentional communities is just another way of saying, what are you intentional about? You're intentional about the way you're building towards the future,
Yeah.
and it's this way of shifting into more of a long-term thinking pattern than short-term thinking pattern. And from my perspective, one of the main reasons that humanity is in such a pickle is because of short-term thinking patterns. um,
Yeah.
and what I see you doing out there is this experiment in long-term thinking, which I think is worth highlighting and exploring, because if it can be done somewhere, it can be done in other places too.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's both one of the strengths and greatest challenges that we have, um, as a project. And that long-term thinking, the intentionality, I think, comes from just rebalancing a priority between the what are we doing and the why are we doing it, for any project. We we in Burning Man the event, the concept of self-reliance is very important. It is one of the 10 foundational principles of Burning Man. That needs to be balanced with another one of the principles, which is communal effort. And like, how do you square that? And part of that is doing things as collectives or as groups, and developing an interdependence, as opposed to a true, sort of self independence. Um, but that why, I think, perhaps particularly in this early phase of the project, is more important than the what. We have some great projects and some great groups that are working out there, but for us as folks that are coordinating and managing all of these sort of disparate pieces, um, it is the why are we doing this, and how does that lead us to go about things, and that sort of thought process, and then getting to the, like, okay, what is the physical form of the thing? How do these things make sense in terms of resources or logistics? um, which is a little bit different than, which causes us to think in sort of a different way than we have for the event. I went to Burning Man starting 2007. I really loved that aspect of it, but there's some thinking in that like I've had to personally retrain myself around, and I think organizationally we're getting there to do that, on a larger scale, which is like, on an annual cycle. And I sort of, before this, was involved in doing festival production and event production. So like on an annual cycle, um, you know, in 3 months, you better be 25% of the way. That's just how it works, to sort of accomplishing your end state and what you hope to accomplish. Um, and in this project, we are looking at decades or generations. So the pace may be slower at times, but part of that is because we're spending so much time looking at the why are we doing that, and how is that causing us to go about what we're choosing to go about, or you know, is this something that is feeling um, good for the folks that are involved? Are we having good communication systems? Are we doing the right thing by the land and its other inhabitants? You know, those sort of things lead to a different type of project. And
Mm.
our, you know, what we do is unique in that, you know, for people who aren't familiar with the Black Rock City event for with Burning Man, you know, it is only a festival in the loosest terms, in that, like, we're not booking acts, we're not building stages, you know, we're not doing any of that programming. We are really administrators of place and setting up the systems to allow people to come in, um, contribute what they want to contribute, and put up just the widest of guardrails that we can possible to prevent things from sort of going off the rails. So, you know, like, instead of building stages, we're like securing the perimeter, putting up roads, street signs, bathrooms, emergency medical systems, sort of intervention teams in terms of interpersonal conflict, and placement, and saying, cool, you go here and you go here, and sort of setting those things up as city administrators, really. So as a land-based project, we're doing a very similar thing. It would not have been hard for Burning Man to purchase this land, to raise the money to do some incredible, you know, capex, and find some architects to build some sweet central lodges, and then contract with some artists to build like what would have been a pretty badass Burning Man hot springs retreat, you know, in a very, I think, conventional linear real estate development sense. If we were targeting primarily the what are we doing, um, because of the model of Black Rock City that we come from, and because we are trying to lead with the why are we doing this, our model is dramatically different, which is doing some of those similar things. We have secured the perimeter, we're identifying roads, we're putting in some of the support systems in terms of well and septic, we're identifying what areas of the property are appropriate for what kinds of activity, how those things play together in totality, and then offering up to what are at the time external groups to say, oh, you want to work on this kind of project? Let's talk about where that might make sense in the property. How can we support you? And then go and do your thing, which to me is the really interesting nut of this project, after having spent some time on other land-based projects and other things, which is like, it's not a master plan. It is a collectively organized group of people who are doing communal stewardship of land, and trying to create a potent cultural center that is collectively realized. And to me, I find that just uh, fascinating. You know, that question of like, cool, does this model, this decentralized, community organized, self-reliant model, work in a year-round context? We have things like zoning and building code and neighbors and snow, and it isn't this ephemeral thing that pops up usually once a year, and then fades away. Can that persist to provide people, and I know a multitude of people that have gone to Burning Man and had sort of these profound revelations, these peak experiences, or these reevaluations of self and place, and community and spirituality. Can we provide a place for that, or help instigate with community partners a place like that, that is somewhere that somebody can go 365 days a year, and continually check in on? I don't
Mm.
know. That's the question that, like,
That's why
success is
that's
not
why we're
guaranteed.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
for
exactly.
sure. Um, so I mentioned this to you, about a year and a half ago. I moved from Santa Cruz down to Los Angeles, which is a pretty big cultural difference. And it's a small town surf community to one of the biggest cities in the United States, and the homelessness in Los Angeles is apocalyptic. And when I moved
Yeah.
down here, it was so fucking jarring for me to just walk down the street. Santa Cruz has its own homeless issues, but I mean, if you walk down the streets of Venice, it is very jarring. And I actually noticed myself in the months of living in Los Angeles. I noticed my mind see homeless people less
Yeah.
as the months went on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, and it's just fascinating to me how place changes our perception and changes us. And culture is such a big weather system that most of the time we're not even aware of. But every single day, it's just changing us, just 1%, just 1%, just 1%,
Yeah.
until we become totally different people, right? That our relationship with place and where we live inevitably changes us. How has working at Fly Ranch changed you?
Mm. Yeah, I have a similar experience in that when I first started working for Burning Man, this is going to be 2014, is when I started working full time. Um, I moved to San Francisco, from kind of the foothills of the Sierras on the western slope in California, and I'd spent time living in Seattle for a while, in Portland for a while, but it was really when I moved to San Francisco that I had a similar experience. I noticed just as a course of being a human being, like my empathy levels were reduced. My compassion for folks that are unhoused or for others, was just I felt like I had to put up these barriers subconsciously, both to myself and my existence and walking down the street, kind of like minding my own business, but also in my heart, and and closing off that doorway to be like, oh, here's a fellow human being that is suffering, and really what I should be doing is everything I can to like reduce that suffering. Like that's kind of the right thing to do. I think that environment is tricky. I think there are some inherent challenges in any urban situation. I do think places that have like lovely year-round climates, will experience perhaps more severe versions of that. Right now I'm in Reno, and there's an unhoused population here, but it's nowhere near what I was experiencing when I was living in the East Bay or what I was living in San Francisco. Um, I think in part that is um, I notice it frankly in traffic too. There is this sense that like I my commute, that one has to be really aggressive because they're going to lose out on their spot, or someone's going to cut in front of them, or there's just such a sense of resource, time, and space scarcity in those environments, and those systems that have such pressures, that one has to get into a bit of a more culturally adversarial relationship of like, oh, I've got to make sure that I've got mine because I feel so close to not, you know.
And you're reminded of it when you see unhoused people along the streets, right? I think that there's something subconscious that happens to people who think, well, that's a few decisions away
Yeah.
to being in a place where I'm a cultural pariah, because we see this every single day. And it's so sad to see. Like my mom worked at a homeless teen shelter for years and years when I grew up, and she always told me, she's like, you don't need to give homeless people money if they ask it for you, but you need to look them in the eye,
Yeah.
because she was told by these homeless kids that they would just go days without anyone acknowledging them, so they felt invisible to society. And I always have taken that with me. um and as you say, like when you're in a certain space, it does cause you to turn up certain dials in your personality and turn down others, that don't necessarily move us towards a state of thriving.
Yes. Yeah. And that's unfortunately may just be a consequence, maybe not inherent to, but really strongly available in kind of urban environments or in those competitive environments. And the other side of that is like hustle culture. Is like, oh, I gotta work hard, I gotta do my side hustles, I gotta get ahead. Like I think there's an aspect of that that can sort of cause people to lose sense of the humanity. And fortunately, I think one of the things that allows in Black Rock City to have such a strong sense of community is that like everyone can relate to the struggles of the other folks that are out there. You know, when I meet somebody in that urban environment, and obviously like it's unique in a sense of like on one level both nobody's homeless and everybody's homeless. You know, everyone's
Yeah.
a visitor
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, that you know, like it's hard. Burning Man is hard to do. It is a hard thing. It's hard to get out there. It is not cheap or free. You know, there is extreme weather. It is hot. It is a challenge to be out there. And so when everyone is kind of sitting in that uncomfortability, I find that the level of empathy for the fellow human being is just unlike anywhere else that I've ever been. There's a relatability. There's a communal sense through that shared struggle that I have seen, and hopefully it's true for other people, that is then taken back to the places where people live, whether it's Omaha, Nebraska, or New York City, or LA, or even Santa Cruz, you know, where they can take some of that lived experience of empathy for the fellow human being outside of the temporary autonomous context of the Burning Man event and take it into their real world, which I think is like a line of many things, whether it's like you know, personal spiritual revelation, or a new sense of capacity within oneself, or the development of skills or ideas for how to do this work project better. You know, like Burning Man has an impact on people, and I think those people can then take that back to their lives and then have a greater impact on the world. You know, like I'm friends with plenty of people that are like Burning Man changes the world, and you know, my take on that is that like Burning Man changes people, and people change the world. And that's everything from, you know, somebody who goes back to their shared living house and is like, hey, like you know, I have this inspired sense of how we can do what we're doing with a greater sense of community and inclusion and like expression and participation, to, you know, frankly, people that are like revolutionizing the technological forefront um, of society as we know it. You know, like the first Google Doodle was just a notice that was like, "Hey guys, we're going to Burning Man. You know, don't try and email us." And this is like late '90s. Like, don't try and email us. We're off in the desert. We'll be back. You know, and I think like those experiences have played deeply into how that thing that now massively shapes how people gather and disseminate and use information um, has in the world. And you know, it's true with you know, folks like Elon Musk, or artists or musicians, you know, people that go out there and have powerful experiences and then take that and try to use those experiences to radiate something in the world that hopefully makes it a better place. And I've seen that impact be very real and very direct. And so one of my driving motivations is, cool, what is the exponential amplifier that we can achieve if it is not only available to people for 1 week? If that kind of inspiration and that kind of ability to drop into that type of existence isn't only available to 80,000 people 1 week a year in this same spot in a very particular time period that is frankly like hard for teachers, hard for students. It's usually the first week of school. Or, you know, like frankly, tickets to the Burning Man event are not cheap. And so like, what if we had an opportunity to expand the possibilities for inclusion to amplify that ripple impact, that kind of this cultural, you know, I don't even know what to call it. The thing that is Burning Man, whatever that may be, in your personal understanding of it, what that impact can be on the world.
Mm. Since moving from San Francisco to now splitting your time between Reno and Fly Ranch, how have you noticed your personality change, or have you at all?
Yeah, you know, I would say um, my urban experiment in San Francisco was a 4 or 5 year education experience. At no point did I feel like, oh, I'm living my best life, and I'm living in sort of right relationship with the things in my spirit that I need. I'm much more of a um, uh, well, so I try to spend a lot of time in Alaska. My wife's from Alaska. We have a small cabin up there. I love it. I love the sort of ratio of human dominance to the natural environment. I love some of those things that really get me going about Burning Man, which is like a sense of self-reliance and the value of community, and everyone sort of having to rough the winters together or share the resources that they have. And it's really community centered up there. That is the thing that like calls to my soul. And so in a way, getting the ability to do that on a day to day professionally is like really brings me a great sense of um, calm and joy and appreciation for this opportunity. I don't take that lightly. Um, Reno's a funky little town. Um, I have this like I adore Reno. And it's got a funky little history, and it's always going to be a little rough around the edges. It's pretty it's still pretty Wild West. Um, but I sort of both Nevada and Alaska, I think have a lot of overlaps in terms of like, A, there's a tremendous amount of federally held land. B, it's sort of got this like sort of hippie libertarian, it's like um uh rednecks growing pot and hippies with guns, like it kind of threads the needle on some of these things culturally that I personally jive with. For me, in my experience out at the ranch, I get to see sunsets and sunrises, which are a thing that were hard to come by in San Francisco. I get to really have an experience in true wilderness, which is a reminder of like what it actually means to be a human on this planet, not so much what perhaps modern economics and society, quote unquote, tells you that one's experience as a human should be, and thus the things that one should value or pursue or expend effort in the name of, which generally, the things that one is being told that they should be pursuing in Babylon, if you will, benefits somebody's pocket, somebody's bottom line. And so to have a space where we can go and say like, cool, the end result here is not the financial betterment of anyone, but an opportunity to like do something powerful for people and have an opportunity to explore the boundaries of this community that has radically changed my life, um, and use the creative capacity, the resources, and the ingenuity of this creative community to start to address some of the existential challenges of the current state of humanity, of which there are plenty, um, is like deeply fulfilling. And it's challenging at times in the heart of winter when no one is there, and like we're trying to address like a broken water line. Like it can be like not fun. But even in those times, it can still be deeply rewarding. Even just last week, like I was driving to the property, and in the span of like 10 minutes, it was like, this beautiful little fox stopping on the side of the road to just say, "Hey, what's up?" And these wild horses, and this golden eagle swooping over, and then these little jackrabbits running around, and like, those little things are just reminders, whether it's the consciousness or the subconsciousness, of like, hey, this is a shared space. You are uh, but one inhabitant of this. You may think that you're the smartest and most clever, species here, but really, like, you are a small part of a much bigger thing. And I think the context of that, can be extrapolated out into not just the environmental and ecological, but also cultural, financial, and energetic. Like, oh, I've got a small piece in this, and we are all subject to many of the same forces, and perhaps um, a tact of cooperation and communal effort through that shared struggle might be a more productive one than, saying, oh, I've got to make sure that I get mine, and I've got to put up these walls to protect against seeing the true humanity, because I feel like somehow I am different than these other beings or other humans or other forces at play, when, like, really, man, we are all subject to the same forces on this rock.
You certainly work at Burning Man. We're all one, man.
Yeah, we're
You're
all
giving
one,
me the
brother.
all one speech right now. I knew it would come to this. I was doing a podcast with a guy from Burning Man. Jesus.
I mean,
Ugh.
it's,
But
there
it's
are more
true.
things that impact all of us than impact one of us.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think that you spoke to this a bit, but the idea of shared suffering is such a direct path to empathy. One of my favorite books is called Tribe by Sebastian Junger, and he has this great line where he says, "Humans don't mind hardship. What we mind is feeling unnecessary," and that's what modern
Uh,
society accomplishes perfectly. It's making people feel unnecessary. So I think that a few reasons why Burning Man in itself is such a conduit for psycho spiritual revolution in people is one, that shared hardship, and two, it shows people a new ceiling, even albeit temporary, on a kind of utopian feeling.
yeah,
Um, and I think that just showing people what's possible is accomplishes a similar thing to what a high dose psychedelic trip or MDMA trip can do for empathy. It can show a lot of people who have maybe had really rough lives that that state of mind is possible to inhabit.
yeah,
And although it might be a long road to get back there, there are habits you can build. There are certain ways in which you can live life that do get you back there. That, at least for me, is partially what it's done. I remember going there when I was 16 for the first time to Burning Man, and just being blown away that
hmm,
a place could value art so much. I
yeah,
had just never experienced a place, a culture that put that amount of value on art. And it made me appreciate art more. It made me start to take that into account as something to prioritize in the years ahead.
yeah. The valuation equation at Burning Man is kind of buck wild, because your wallet is useless there, right? So, like, in a lot of ways, the metrics that society often uses to say, cool, here is your value, or here is your worth, or here is your status, are pretty dramatically eroded. And so, in my personal experience, the value of you as a community member at Burning Man is not rooted in what you have accomplished to be able to hold for yourself and thus accomplish a socioeconomic status. Your status is not what's in your wallet. It's truly like what you have to share with other people. The heralded heroes of Burning Man in any given year are like the people that build like a buck wild crazy art piece, and give it away, or create these beautiful little intimate experiences deep in a pocket somewhere that somebody stumbles upon and has this, like, beautiful time. What the status engine, in Black Rock City, is much more about what one has to share with others, and that I find to be a profound experience, in terms of, like, oh yeah, these are things that are dramatically important and perhaps have been undervalued, um, in the current society, and I do think that there is a powerful parallel in, um, you know, both what the day-to-day existence is, either at Burning Man or at Fly Ranch, and something like those empathy generating psycho-spiritual experiences. To put in a little plug, one of the co-founders of Burning Man, Will Roger, who's also on our working group, he's sort of Part of our philosophical group behind the administration of the project. He helped build the city in '97. He's been really stewarding this dream of Burning Man having this particular property for 20 years, up through the point in which we bought it. And he recently wrote a book, and a lot of his work it's called In Search of the Common Shaman. It is really about the power of those collective experiences, or the power of those deeply psychospiritual experiences, whether they are like, hey, we're all here and we're about to get socked in by a massive dust storm or a massive snowstorm, and we have to like step back and appreciate that awe and support each other, as well as something like a extremely powerful psychedelic experience where one really perhaps has a perspective shift where they can deeply examine things within themselves, things in their immediate context and environment, things in what he calls the collective consciousness, which is sort of like the spiritual connective tissue between beings of all kinds. And that within those types of experiences, whatever form they take, there's a deep, deep wisdom that perhaps has been lost in culture, that perhaps now we're just starting to um, get to the point of a resurgence of those, enough so that we can have a collective realization, perhaps like a hundredth monkey thing, where we all be like, oh, we've been doing this kind of wrong. And I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of like this collective awakening of like, oh no, we, post-industrial revolution, we've been prioritizing the wrong things. But I do think, particularly in some of the younger generations, like there's a different value system that is coming out of, in part, some experiences like that at scale, which is, I think, why we see perhaps a different value system emerging to address some of the existential problems that we have now, which is like really understanding a potential climate catastrophe, or really understanding what it means um, to have a society where um, everyone is treated equal and everyone can be included, and not lip service to that, while the same old rich white dudes profiteer from the long established systems.
Hmm. Yeah, I'll keep quoting Sebastian Younger here, but he also wrote in that book Tribe. Said a disaster accomplishes what many governments profess, which is the equality of all people.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
he was talking about the Blitzkrieg, and he's talking about war and how devastating earthquakes, and that just immediately it literally levels people. And then often they'll sheepishly recount it as some of the best times of their life because they felt so connected.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is a powerful component. Um, that leveling factor is a powerful component in the context of Burning Man, which is that, like, there's not like certain neighborhoods don't get hit by dust storms in the city. Um, and it happens to us all collectively, and there are very few things in modern society that I think happen to us collectively, particularly as suddenly we have access to all human knowledge at the tip of our fingertips for a large majority of the population of the earth. The diversification of that, I think, is happening more rapidly than the the communal experience aspect of that, where like people are just sort of diving deeper into their worlds, and there is no, I don't think there is a popular culture at this point. Um, and so, when something like that comes around in a context that suddenly like levels everybody, I do think that like we have a greater appreciation for that humanity through that shared struggle. And then the conversations become more about the relatability to others, and kind of like, oh man, how did you get through that
Yeah.
that crazy experience that we all just had? Where were you? There's a definite power in that, and I think it helps create the culturally held narrative of the we, which I don't know that we have a lot outside of
Yeah.
a context like that.
We grasp at it. It's funny. Small talk is actually our attempt to grasp at shared experience, which is why we talk about the weather,
Yeah,
or we
right.
talk
How's
about
the weather?
an event that we think may have happened to everyone or is affecting everyone. It's like economy, politics, the weather. It's just humans um, clumsily grasping at shared experiences, and we call it small talk.
Yeah, and what I truly believe is like a plea for humanity and empathy. People want to relate, um, and I think there's something powerful in that. That you're right that the thing I think that people fear most, or that a lot of people fear most, is being perhaps irrelevant or unneeded. And in an extreme environment, everybody is needed. It's kind of it's a perpetual all hands on deck. I was working for the communications team for Burning Man at the time, but in 2012, the Bureau of Land Management classified and deployed resources as per that classification, of a disaster. They have classification categories, and in some ways, I think there's some wisdom to that. That like in those situations, and thankfully that one is so much less uh, detrimental and impactful and harming than like a natural disaster. Um, but we have sort of this opportunity to play in that space of like, oh, this kind of sucks for everybody. And when it sucks for everybody, particularly by choice, how much does that strengthen the bonds where you automatically have so much more in common with any person you will pass walking down the street in that environment than you might in LA or in San Francisco. And instead of like, oh, I got to put those blinders up and I got to try and not make eye contact and I got to just move forward and do the things on my checklist. It is like looking people in the eyes, smiles, hugs. Like somebody's like, hey, come check out this thing we're doing. You're like, all right, cool, let's what do you got? In a way that I think there's a fear of, and perhaps a an urban programming against in some other contexts.
Yeah. After a Burning Man dust storm, the smiles may be weary, but they're still smiles.
Yes, yes, where I think if you um in other contexts, it's either going to fall the way of like a true disaster, and like there are some much more important and much more prescient things to attend to, in terms of like life and well-being of a community, um, or people going through their day not experiencing um, the reality of like what it means to be a human and the forces at play there, and people can forget um, the truth of that in a way that I think is brought up by experiences like you had in Yellowstone, or people have out at Fly Ranch, or people have in Black Rock City, which is like a powerful reminder of our place in this much bigger thing.
Yeah. So I need to ask about the economy of Fly Ranch, because some people will say, well, great, you're talking all about sustainability, but how is this sustainable? So how is Fly Ranch funded? Do you have any plans to start selling things out there to fund yourselves? How do you think about the economy of that space?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, you're 100% right that our approach, and I think the realistic approach to sustainability, is not just environmental. I think there are issues of cultural sustainability. I think there are issues of like individual energetic and emotional sustainability, and there's financial sustainability. If it doesn't pencil, it's not going to work. And there are plenty of well-intentioned projects that just like have run out of money, and then there are others where that economic driver, folks have sort of slipped into that being the priority, and that why and that how has sort of dissipated or dissolved in the pursuit of financial security. And then there are others that like really strike an interesting balance. I think of places like Arcosanti, where like, they have a foundry, and they're a community that started by Paolo Solari, and it's really interesting architecture and culture. And they have a foundry where they produce bells, and these bells are sold, and it helps fund that community and allows them to continue to thrive. And now they're on a really exciting edge of sort of exploring the next, post founder, next generation shift, that I see a lot of these types of projects sort of hiccup on, which is like, cool. How does it go to the next generation? For
What is
us,
Arco? Sorry.
so Arcosanti is, it's a desert community. It's in Arizona. Um, it is Paolo Solari was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, and really wanted to explore building a community focused carless kind of desert community based on uh, living in right relationship with the land. Uh, the idea was centered around his philosophy of arcology, which is architecture and ecology blend. Um, and it's a cool, funky place. They used to do an event there called Forum, which I've been to a couple of times, and they are one of those um, peers that we have to learn from. They're also, they've been functioning for decades, and so there's some things to learn there in terms of how to pursue longevity. And they're experiencing some of the same issues that we are, which is like in the last 5 years have lost their founder, trying to reevaluate where they're at. It's a cool site. I encourage people to check it out. I'm sure they do tours or things like that. Um, in terms of our economics, I think it's a blend. One of the core principles of Burning Man is gifting, and as much as we can, we try to preserve and encourage that, of sort of this stone soup model of like, come and contribute what you can, um, and then everything that you're offering to that space should be a gift to all other people that are in that space. And for us, that means both that space during that time period and that space, for anyone that will come in the future. And that's one of the fun things that we get to play with that isn't as prevalent at the Burning Man event, which is, we have people coming week after week, and so people can leave that trace and then have it be for the benefit of other people, whether that's infrastructure systems that we're putting up or big weird art that people can climb, or interventions in the landscape that make transportation easier, or support things like just being there for a longer period of time, in line with environmental sustainability. So to purchase the property, Burning Man raised about $7.5 million from 14 incredible donors, with no strings attached, and that even in itself is a little bit of a coup in our modern economic system. We had a group of folks, coming out to Burning Man for a long time. There's a long time burners, um, who have said like, hey, when you're ready to take this step into saying, cool, is it possible to transition this model into sort of a year-round context? Is that possible? The pursuit of that question is interesting enough, that they wanted to support that and make that possible. Um, so part of that funding was to purchase, acquire, and hold the property. Part of that was for a couple years of a runway to get going, to form an operations team, to form you know advisory groups that would help think about some of these larger philosophical questions of how does this community approach this piece of land. Um, and that was the impetus of it, and financially what made it possible to start to pursue this project. We have a donation portal on our website. People make contributions to that. We also explore the model of experience generated revenue through community partners. So one of the things that we host, almost every week, week in and week out, is we partner with a local conservation group, the Friends of Black Rock High Rock, based out of Gerlach, Nevada, who are incredible stewards of the national conservation area. They do a lot of work in terms of public lands education, things like that. And they do nature walks several times a week. And so these are 3-hour device-free walks where we say like, hey, embrace the immediacy of this, put your phone away, put your camera away, like let's go on a walk in this beautiful space, see these sort of creative interventions that people have been working on, and come and check it out. People make a donation to that group. They split those donations, kick it back to us to help to maintain and preserve those property, and it becomes a revenue stream that feels like an appropriate balance between wanting to make the site accessible and wanting everything there to be possible, and also having ways to support and fund our stewardship projects, landscape scale preservation, art builds, things like that. We also have a number of targeted capital campaigns that we've gone through for specific projects. So, we about 2 years ago embarked on an international design challenge for foundational infrastructure for the property. We basically spent 14 months through Dr. Lisa Beers, who's an incredible wetlands ecologist and a really vital member of our team, who in spirit really speaks for and represents the property as we're having these conversations around, cool, do we go this way? Do we go that way? So she did a 14-month environmental baseline, flora, fauna, weather instrumentation, mapping invasive species, where there was garbage that needed to be picked up, where we could be operating equipment and not have too much of an impact, where we needed to be more sensitive, what species are endemic that we really needed to protect and preserve, that kind of thing. Open sourced all of that data. We put it out to an international group of designers. We partner with this group called the Land Art Generator Initiative, Robert and Elizabeth, who are incredible, and they do design challenges in different locations for site-specific installations of art that generate power around the world, and they're incredible. I think they're working in Germany right now. And we said, cool, we are opening up this site, and we have a design corridor that runs through the spine of the property, and we are soliciting site-specific installations that fit into at least one of 5 categories. Those categories were power, water, shelter, food, and regenerative waste systems. So instead of us coming in and saying, we know what the best foundational layer of infrastructure that will allow us to increase the carrying capacity and the activity capacity of this site, and instead of that, we said we want to put it out to the community, and we want to make it possible for people to co-create and show us what they have for this site, to be able to put in the infrastructure here. So in that way, we got some incredible results from that. We were able to go on a campaign to help fundraise to institute that design challenge. And then from there, we had 55 shortlisted projects. We published a book called Land Art in the 21st Century, which is available for people. And you can see not only some incredible essays about the property, all of what the information that we have gathered about that space, but the 55 shortlisted projects. Those 55 shortlisted projects have been invited to build, and then with the 10 of those that were selected by an incredible group of people that were both technical experts as well as jurors, selected 10 of those that we're going to be working to partially fund, much in the way that we do art grants in Black Rock City. And from there, we've done a placement process. We sort of know where those projects are going. A couple of those groups have started to do their prototypes, and over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, that's really going to be the core of the infrastructure work that we're doing is building these, and some of them are incredible, and I would encourage people to check it out. You can Google, Fly Ranch Design Challenge, Fly Ranch
Where can
Lockheed.
people get the book?
So it's available on Amazon.
Oh, cool. And what's it called again?
It's called Land Art of the 21st Century.
Awesome.
The Land Art Generator Initiative at Fly Ranch. It's also available directly from the publisher at the University of Chicago website, and it's great. Also, the Fly Ranch website, which is flyranch.org, there's a link to the main design challenge page where people can peruse through those 55 shortlisted projects. And it was an incredible process for us to say, cool, let's radically expand a couple of concentric circles of participation and invite people in to be foundational participants in this project, as opposed to us setting a target date, building something, saying we've built it, now come in and enjoy. And really, it is a co-created project and experience where we are supporting people to make interventions and contributions to the property in a way that I think mirrors the Burning Man event. The design challenge model we have found to be really powerful in how do we take that model of Black Rock City, which is, hey, we have provided some very base services and are sort of holding these cultural boundaries, and then within that, contribute what you would like to contribute. We have some
Hmm.
novel constraints within that in terms of things like building code and zoning and stuff like that. But I think that's just one step closer to how do we create a space that is sort of settled in between, sort of the default conventional world, and all of its priorities and needs, and this temporary autonomous zone of Black Rock City and its very different set of priorities and needs. And how do we create a middle space in there that can hopefully be a conduit between those two things, where like some of what is iterated and practiced in the temporary urban environment and is very much a city with like newspapers and cafes and restaurants and civic services and things like that in Black Rock City, and take some of the knowledge that comes out of what would be any city designer's dream, which is like to etch a sketch the thing once a year and say, oh, we learned from that, let's institute some alleys here. Or like, oh, we noticed a challenge in how this neighborhood was sort of zoned or placed, and like let's play with that model again and do this iterative design process. How city planners can then benefit from that, as well as like how can we start to import into Black Rock City, even long held knowledge, to improve that space, both technologically, culturally, spiritually. Like as a middle space, I think we're in pursuit a little bit of exploring what are the core components of that kind of experience, um, that are the essential core components, right? So like, yes, we're still in the desert. Yes, we have extreme environment. Yes, we're doing ambitious build projects. Yes, it is awe-inspiring, much like Black Rock City, but like we're doing it without generators, for instance. We're running off solar power, or wind
Really?
power.
You guys
Yeah,
don't you guys don't use generators?
zero generators. We've done 56 events out on the property. We have a functioning operations center, but we're 24 miles from the nearest grid. And so like, we're trying to say, cool, we can do that um, without generators, right? Take that knowledge from a context outside of Black Rock City and bring it into a space where it meets with some of those values technologically. Also, like bottled water, I don't think that's necessary to that kind of powerful and profound types of experiences that people have at Black Rock City. Instead of porta potties, let's start to pilot biofiltration toilets, and say, cool, let's do something with this waste. It's only waste if you waste it. Interventions like that are sort of this place to play in that middle ground, that can hopefully benefit from the knowledge of each and leave behind some of the things that frankly suck, about either uh, the conventional default world or the Black Rock City experience, which I don't know how much you love the porta potties, but they're not my favorite thing.
No, no, I've had some bad acid trips in the porta potties. Um,
Yeah, it's a particular recipe for like, oh man, this is
yeah,
not great. This is not
this is
great.
not set and setting I was looking for, but I really
Yeah,
need to take a dump right now. Let's make this fast.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I think that's so great, and you mentioning that just simple stuff like not using generators or using compostable toilets. I do think that they're important, because those are the little aha moments that people take back to society with them. And goddamn, if all of LA started using compostable toilets, we would be in a very different situation. And I think that it's just so it strikes me as very logical what you're doing. Which is you might not expect me to say, because Burning Man and Fly Ranch, it's immediately seen under the context of like, whoa, this crazy thing. But if you were an alien coming down to Earth,
Yeah.
I would bet that one of the first things you would wonder about is, wait, so you just use all this shit for like 2.5 minutes, and then it just lasts for thousands of years,
Yeah,
and
every disposable fork.
you don't really have a plan to deal with that.
Yeah,
Uh that's a strange thing that everyone on this planet seems to, virtually everyone has just sort of agreed to have this out of sight, out of mind system to deal with all their shit in a incredibly stupid way. And then there's just these few people who are experimenting with alternative systems that would reflect all of nature. Like literally everything besides humans
yeah,
is operating on this basically zero waste system.
yeah.
And so I think that it's just very normal and logical how you're spending your time working on this project.
Thanks. I mean, sometimes it seems deeply illogical, but I think perhaps that's just in comparison to um, many of the things outside of that. I do think that it's an opportunity to sort of go to that first principles thinking of kind of re-examining some of the assumptions that we have about the way that things should function, to sort of look at that larger context and really think more critically about our inputs and our outputs. I love Burning Man. There's also currently in the way that it functions some inherent non-sustainability there in terms of like not everyone, and there's certainly people that are putting a tremendous amount of thought into how they could be more considerate about their impact in the way that they do Burning Man. There's an entire green theme camp community. There's alternative energy zone. There's some um, you know great work that's being done in that arena. But there's still people who like buy a bunch of shit at Walmart, go out there, and then chuck it in a dumpster afterwards. Right, and like I don't think that can't work um, on a long enough horizon. And so in that way, our thinking about things not on that annual event production cycle, but thinking about things over the course of decades or frankly generations. I became a father recently, and so that has really informed my thinking of like, oh, we're sort of stewarding a place that I hope my kid can see the realization of. It's not so much perhaps even for my lifetime. So getting the opportunity to rethink some of those things on a longer timeline, I do think the next logical step is like, oh, we have been doing some things the wrong way. Um, and I think it's apparent in little ways in terms of like how do we source materials, even building materials. It's if we were to buy from a conventional lumberyard, where is that coming from? What is the trucking cost of that? There are still systems that we are inseparable from. We are still driving gasoline trucks. I come from Reno quite regularly, and like that has an impact. But as much as we can, trying to rethink some of those things from a first principles perspective, um, and then experiment with what some alternative solutions might be. We are not. Um, we don't have a high enough sense of self to believe that like, oh, we're going to figure it out on the first try.
Yeah.
Regular and
Well,
repeated failure is uh, ever present in our project, and those are powerful lessons.
yeah. You're not being annoying about it. Like do good, just don't be annoying about it. And I think that that's where a lot of conversations become gridlocked, is that the environmental people will point fingers, and then it's just so easy to poke holes in their lives in all the ways that they're being unsustainable because we're operating within this system. But that doesn't mean that we can't try to be a little bit better. Humans are flawed, and we should all be trying as best we can, however flawed, and yeah, however flawed we might be. So I commend you, man, and I want to come out and check out Fly Ranch. What is remind me what are the best ways to come out and take tours and potentially volunteer? How can we be helpful to anyone who's listening on this podcast? How can they get involved?
Yeah. So we got a number of ways to get involved. The program that I was referring to earlier, the nature walks, is like a great, if you're in the area, and you want to kind of dip a toe into, Fly Ranch nature walks are great. You can sign up for those at flyranch.org. As I mentioned, they're free, 3-hour device-free experiences that give people just an overview sense of what we're doing, give them the opportunity to see the geyser. And for a lot of people who have just like seen the weird multicolored geyser on the front of National Geographic, like that can check that thing off their list, and they get to see it. They help support our project, and that's great. For those that are like, hey, I want to roll up my sleeves and dig in, we do monthly stewardship weekends. And so, once a month during our programming season, we'll sort of go out for a weekend. On Saturday, we'll invite folks out to come help us work on whatever projects are in the pipeline for that time. And some of that is like, event production prep. Some of that is a lot of what we're doing this year is trying to mitigate the impact of non-native plant species, cheatgrass, Russian knapweed, that kind of thing. And then sometimes it's just helping people with their art builds or their infrastructure builds, working on projects. We anticipate that over the course of the next year, as we're starting to institute a lot of these design challenge finalists, they'll have a huge call out for volunteers. So there's people that are like doing earth and bricks, and there's people that are doing substantial earth moving, and like they're going to need volunteers. And it's our like monthly flagpole event to like come on out to the property, come hang out with us, work for a day, soak in the hot springs afterwards. We have a pretty we have a long-standing internal policy that like you gotta work to soak in the hot springs. The hot springs are incredible, as I've said. Like I've been to a lot, and they're by far the most beautiful and serene and least icky hot springs that I have been in. And so you can't pay to soak. You can't do the nature walk and then go for a soak. You have to work for the benefit of the project and property to be able to soak in the hot springs. So the folks that like lead nature walks, they can soak. The people that come out to our stewardship days, they can soak. And that's sort of like a great way to get involved. We also have a program, volunteer led. Like all of the rest of these projects, they are something that we support, that somebody else outside of our immediate staff is running, where folks can go through an online training. They can then go through an on-site orientation, and then they can camp by the hot springs and by the geysers by themselves, for up to a week, and have an opportunity to like have an isolated experience in that beautiful wilderness environment. When there are groups coming through for nature walks or stewardship days, help maintain and preserve appropriate use of that space, help educate people about that. And really, like, that program, the Fly Ranch Guardians, have become our de facto on-site staff, and it is entirely volunteer-led and volunteer staffed, and gives people a chance to develop a direct and personal emotional relationship with that space, as well as become a part of that team, and like make your contributions of time or of effort, or get more involved there. Those are three like big public doorways.
I love
Outside of
that.
that,
Oh,
yeah,
keep going, keep going, keep going.
outside of that, there are a number of groups that are working on projects, and those sort of need to be found on a group by group basis. Whether it's an artist who's like, I've got this opportunity to build this big thing, or whether it's one of these design challenge groups that are like, cool, we need somebody who's got a ton of experience in electrical engineering, or somebody that can operate heavy machinery. And those are a little more research is required to find those, although all of the design challenge projects are listed on that website. But those are just self-organized groups that are plugging in a way. So that's also another way in which we see and welcome other groups of folks.
Mm. Right on, Zach. Well, thanks for painting the picture for me.
Yeah, brother.
As I mentioned, I'm intensely interested in alternative communities, um, and and specifically that idea of how spaces shape us. It's something that I've been pondering a lot recently, and this conversation was elucidating and gave me some more things to think about. And I would love to I would love. I almost just said I would love to buy you a beer out at Burning Man sometime, but but that won't happen. But I'd love to see you out there and maybe go toe to toe with you in Thunderdome one late one night.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Open invite out to the ranch. You feel free to let us know. As we tell a lot of people, particularly when we're at the event, like, hey, we are out here all year round. So when it works for you, just let us know.
Heck yeah. Right on. Zach, so nice talking with you. And thanks again for taking the time.
Yep. Thanks, Kyle. Have a nice one.